Take 272. Hello, my name's Louis Davidson. Welcome to another episode of Tilting with Tuples. Tonight, I want to talk about a topic that the very title of brings out vehement arguments. We'll get to that. First thing I want to talk about is the name of this podcast. It is called Tilting with Tuples because I couldn't say the original name I came up with. I made some assets. I went into Copilot and I was like, help me, come up with a name. I wanted a name that said, futile effort. Talked about this on the initial episode, but I came up with tilting at windmills. So I changed it to tilting at tuples. You don't tilt with windmills, you tilt at windmills. I then record episode 0 and I say, welcome to Tilting with Tuples. This is, and I don't even notice it. And then I make a few more assets, the intro and the outro, which you see. And I realized as I said it, and then I put up the bug I had created, which you'll see right now. The newer version of that, it's very similar. It says with instead of at, because I had said tilting with tuples the first time and the second time, and I'd made assets with it, and I liked it, and it sounds easier to say. Absolutely wanted a name that would just flow out of my mouth instead of making me think, because I'll tell you what, once I get talking here, this is a very easy process. Until I get talking, though, it is really hard. Getting the title out, I was joking about this being 200 and something. That takes actually more like 5, but it's really hard to get the words out until I start talking. And I'm here just talking to you and me, like we're sitting in the same room, but I can't see you. Okay, so the title, Testing in Production, it was meant to be a little bit of clickbait, right? It's more like rage bait, right? Because I'm like, get people in here, they're going to get, they're going to wait, they're wanting to tear me apart. And there's probably comments, if there's comments, there's going to be a comment or two that says, you should never test in production. And that's okay, because they're absolutely right in what they're thinking of, but not the reality of it. Because I will submit to you that every single person listening to this, whether they build software or cars or furniture or recipes, anything that's on my desk here, I've got a little tiny vacuum to vacuum up the little crumbs when I leave them on my desk. I've got a little bar to hold my phone when I'm taking pictures. This is being tested by me every single day I use it. And sometimes it doesn't work and I complain. Well, this one actually works great, but sometimes the products don't work. Sometimes my car had some problems with the brakes that I had to wait till they found a fix for, because it happened to more than one person. That's where recalls come from. They do their best. And we as software programmers do our best. And before something reaches production, it should be tested as much as possible. And as possible is a very subjective term, because some people think, you should test every line of code, every possible iteration. And we all think that. Well, let's be fair. It's not that we all think that. We all probably inherently know that the more things we test, the less likely they are to fail for another person. But we can't do that. Even Microsoft can't test every single line of code on every piece of hardware out there. Some environments don't lend themselves to testing. It's kind of like when you're building a website. You can't test it on every browser. You can't test that it works everywhere. We all know when you go to the web, you get problems here and there. It doesn't format right. You're on a screen that's like this, or like this, or like this, or like this, or a triangle, right? I'm sure there's a triangle monitor out there somewhere. Maybe it's got a little bit at the top to make it a rectangle. Technically, it looks like a triangle. Well, that's going to be fun to edit. So yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't test. You should test as much as you can. There's a question on how much you should test, I know, but should you test every line of code? Should you test, like if you're in a database, I put a constraint on a foreign key. Should I test that a foreign key works? I need to test that the foreign key exists, perhaps, right? And if that foreign key is not there when we go to the production, I should get a warning about it. And there's all sorts of tests like that. There's other kinds of tests that you do in production that I'm not really talking about today, but that's testing your audience. So you put out an A/B test. You do this to one group, you do this to another. Maybe you give them an application and you say, hey, here is an application. We're going to give the new version to half the people, see if they can get the job done, see if they use it the same way. That's a kind of test. Beta tests are really testing in production when you're using production data. For example, you can get, I don't do it anymore. I didn't like it the first time I did it, but you can get your phone, you can get the beta of iOS. You can get iOS 26 betas and run them. And that's production, because I'm going to expect that my data is still saved when I go into a application. There, I go in notes. I would expect my notes to be saved. I would know that I can't complain about it because it's beta, but they're going to want to know about it. So you really have to be aware when you're using things like beta software that that's testing in a version of production. Production to me, let's step back and define that, is anything where you are doing actual work and you expect that work to matter. And that's a really large group of things, because I expect this camera was taking my picture. It's making me look pretty, right? That's too much to ask from a camera, I think. It's beaming the bits to Riverside here. I expect Riverside to be capturing this data. I expect them to format my audio, which I really love in their software. I expect a lot. I mean, if you think about how much software you run every day to do things, it is an amazing amount of software, and you expect an amazing amount from them. But what are they testing in production? Well, there's two kinds of tests I absolutely think you should do when you deploy software. Smoke tests, some kind of test to make sure that what you put out there works. And you do it quickly. It's one of those things. Did I deploy all the things? Now, if you're doing development correctly, you are starting with a test environment and you're testing it. You're coding it somewhere, you're testing it, you know it works. It's been automatically deployed, ideally to that environment, and you use the exact same software to deploy that to production. And at each step, it runs through a battery of tests. These are unit tests, right? To make sure that every piece of code, if you've written some software that says 1 + 1 = 2, and 1 + 1 = 2, and you test all the iterations that you want to test to make sure that you believe that's good software, that's fantastic. So now you put that out into production, and one of the tests you do is just make sure it works. So there's this thing called the smoke test, which I had no idea what this came from. But a smoke test actually comes from when people were soldering boards and you put all the circuits on there and you plug it in. And there's two tests you do, basically. One, nothing happens. You don't have a fan, not a little light, nothing on the board works. That's one test. That means something's wrong. The other side of that equation, you can immediately know if there's too much power or maybe something's connected incorrectly. There'll be like a puff of smoke. Poof. It's cool looking. It's bad because, you've just blown something. You've got to do a lot more work. And I did not do a lot of hardware. My biggest hardware was desoldering some memory chips and sticking back into a motherboard a few times. But I've seen it. These are words for build verification testing or build acceptance testing. And I get this information from Geeks for Geeks. And let me tell you that we all have different names for these things. I'm sure every company has their own little slightly different ways to do things. And there's some people who are just like hardcore. You've got to do it this way and you've got to do it that way. I don't completely disagree with them in a lot of cases, but the point here is you want to make sure everything is running as you expect it. Like when you take your car to the mechanic, they do the work. And if they did their work right, they then went out and tested it, right? They changed the tires, they balanced the tires, they set it out there, they drove it a few miles. They know what it feels like when a tire's out of balance or the car's out of alignment. So they test, right? They do just some quick little tests that say, I know I did what I know I did good work, and now I know that good work feels like it or like it's right. And then you give it to the customer. Now, this is when what I call real testing, because the real testing is testing it in reality. It's testing that software on every iPad model or every car on every road, in every garage. Maybe the garage has too much humidity and it's destroying some seals. Maybe it's too hot. Maybe it's too cold. Maybe they weren't able to test that. When they test something for 100,000 miles, they don't test it over 5 years. They test it as quickly as they can possibly get it done. Now, what are the things that you're going to test? This is what I call weird boundary testing. And when you're doing normal tests, most people are going to test, can I put first name? What if I don't put a last name? What if I don't put a middle name? What if I don't? And that's great. But what if a person's name is all numbers? How is that going to be treated? What if a person's name includes emojis? What if a person's name includes control characters? What if it includes SQL content, SQL code? And we know, if you've never heard of a SQL injection, right? This happens. This is the things. People did not test these things initially. They test them more now, I'm sure. But if you use code to generate a SQL statement and you don't format it quite properly, someone can just type drop database, give me all the names, guessing the names of tables and things. And you don't track that. You're not looking for that most likely in your logging to see if someone's writing queries, and eventually they figure out things about your data that you don't want them to learn. And then they start pulling out data and you're in big trouble at that point. So this weird boundary testing is one of those things. What if you put in negative for a value that you didn't expect to be negative? What effects is that going to have on your software? A lot of people are going to use things like an integer data type. You know what the maximum for an integer data type is? 2 billion, or in that area. Like, let's say you use an int and use it for number of products ordered. Okay, someone types in 2 billion, maybe on purpose, maybe accidentally, but they do. What happens to your software? A lot of people have name values and they give them 100 characters. What happens if someone puts in a 100-character name? Is that going to break your software? Is that going to break your mailing software? The vastness of the problem set is so big, you can't test for everything. You can't test for every person's name. You can't know that there's possibly someone's name that will break the system. You can't know. I mean, in some cases, it could be someone put in a value that they then hacked into the code and have hidden. There's all sorts of stuff like that happens. And every time I hear about it, I'm thinking, no, I don't be doing that. That's crazy. Who would do that? Yeah, a lot of people would do that. A lot of people do anything they want to, right? There's how many stories do you have heard of people who were siphoning off money because they put in something and it takes it and it's certain value. They do certain things. You can control software with a backdoor if you're malicious enough. I'm not malicious enough. I'm just security conscious enough to be worried about it. Yeah, okay. I think we've already talked about that. If not, very paranoid. I get emails. I hear beeps on my computer at weird times. I know it's usually Instagram because somebody's liked a post or something, but whew, it's just crazy. All right, so that's weird boundary testing. The next thing is load testing. Everybody thinks they load test. Well, not everybody, but every big company thinks they load test. We know We can handle the load no matter what you throw at me. Okay? Great. Taylor Swift comes along, says, I'm going to have a concert. I'm going to have a bunch of concerts. And a lot of people say, I want to go to that. And then there's this many people and this many tickets, and they all want them at that moment. What happens? When McCartney's tickets came out, I was looking at them, and the queue was like 30 some thousand, which means there were already people in the system ordering tickets, and I was like 38,000. The venue did not hold 38,000 to start with that I was looking at in Nashville, if I understand it correctly. Right? There's just some things you can't test. Remember the Netflix fight, Paul versus Tyson. Oh my, it was not entertaining. It was entertaining in the lead up, but the fight itself was, not great, but that tested Netflix's infrastructure, right? Because they could not handle that many simultaneous streamings. There's a lot of software in this world that's built to handle this many people, but they have this many customers. And that's because they don't anticipate every last one of them getting online at the same time. And, you can load test a lot of things. Can you load test millions of customers coming all at once in one period of time and the infrastructure around the world to maintain that? You cannot. You absolutely cannot. The problem is once they come in and they've beaten your software to death, what happens next? Do they drop your service? Do they move to somebody else? Do they tell their friends and their other friends and their followers of your failures? Probably. And it's not fair, honestly, that they do that because you can't test it. It's not possible. Now, what needs to be done is to gradually add people. So as time passes in that fight, they knew how many people were going to be there. They should have said, we're stable here. We can add some more. We're going to add some more. If you're not in yet, keep trying. We're going to do our best. As it grows in number, you're going to find there's a breaking point. Because one of the hard things about selling high demand things is that they're in high demand. Pretty obvious there, right? But that in high demand means somebody wants them. Tickets are probably the worst of this because I've been in queues for a while to buy tickets. Hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. I buy Disney tickets a lot, and sometimes it gets really painful when everybody wants something at the same time. And usually they have more tickets than they have demand, but they don't have more demand than their hardware can handle. And so when you can't get in, you don't know that there's people crashing all over the world just like you. But what's really bad about testing and production of high demand is I put tickets in my cart. I go to pay for them. I press buy tickets and it doesn't do anything. And maybe it starts spinning. And then, sorry, our system had a failure. Please try again. What do you mean, try again? There's no trying again. There were 40,000 people. I was number 40,001 and I got in and it failed. Was I really the last person in line and there's nobody behind me? Or is there another 40,000 people back there? And I got to get back in queue? That's just wrong. At the very least, once you get in line and you're logged in, you should have that position. You shouldn't have to get back in line because their system failed. I think I've digressed just a little bit here, but it is what it is. Testing and production is the truth. The thing is, every time you have a breakdown like that, you should be fixing it. And that should become a thing that you fix. And not just because you don't plan to sell any Avenger in-game tickets anymore, but because it may happen. There may be some ticket, maybe something you're selling that you're not going to be able to handle. And if you can only handle 1,000 people, Say you've got 100,000 people, and you can only handle 1,000. It's so much better to let those 1,000 people go and let the next group, let the next group, let the next group, and not crash the system. And don't forget, not only are they not just buying that one set, there's other people buying regular tickets, right? Not everybody was buying in-game. Some people just wanted to go see Snoopy cartoon, or I don't know what was that on at the same time. I also like Snoopy. You need to see both. You haven't seen the Snoopy movie. Good movie. Avenger Endgame, that whole series is good until then. Maybe it's not as good as now, but I still like it. Anyhow, so keep that mindset. When you start building software, you're testing your design. You're going back and saying, this is the design. Does it work? And then you're testing that the code you wrote meets those requirements, does everything you expect it to. And then you're taking it to the next step and the next step, and you're testing every along the way. You're building up this rich set of tests that make sure your software works from end to end. But you keep in mind, production is another version of that, right? Keep an eye on what's happening there. Watch for weird values. There's always somebody who's come up with some way to go to a message, right? And they've entered in x plus x0, x plus 3, 5, 7, 9, and it breaks the phone and it does bad things. And the thing that just I'm incredibly amazed by, and that was not me messing up, that was me, stammering, because I'm really amazed by this, that such a thing existed, that somehow there's a series of bytes you can send to a message that does things to it. I think it's probably a little bit like SQL injection, but I'm still amazed that people let that happen, because that's, it's one of those obvious things that I say obvious. I don't mean obvious. It's not obvious if you're building something and you're the first time or even the 100th time and you've never really put it out in the world. But thinking about what can happen and thinking about the stuff you put in there, like the first time you type someone, John O'Grady, and there's a single quote mark in the string, boom, that part of testing, you should go, wait, well, that's not good. I shouldn't do that. I got to double that up. And usually doubling up quotes stops a lot of things, right? Because every time you put that in there, in a SQL injection, you put a tick, you put your stuff in, you double tick anything in the middle. And this is SQL Server. I don't know how it works in every RDBMS, but once you put those double ticks in there, your string is pretty safe. Not perfectly safe. Parameterizing it, compiling it is so much better. But it doesn't matter what people put in the string. It's treated as a piece of string. And I'll say there's probably things like null characters and other things that you probably want to not allow as well. In fact, I've only tested every single possible value once when I built some software, and the input was an integer. So I could test all the integers and make sure that they did what I expected them to do. I was very proud of that, but I knew that I couldn't do that for everything. Testing in production, it's just, you need to make sure and have that attitude that it's not an experiment. It's not a raw experiment where like, I wonder if this software is going to work. It's more like, I wonder if this software can be broken. Keep that in mind, because you're not really just throwing it out there to see what happens. You're throwing it out there and saying, I believe I've done everything I can. And hackers are playing the game. They're trying. They're attacking your software. They're attacking your AI. You're doing everything they can. You can't test everything everybody's going to do, but the people out there will test it for you. Keep that in mind. I also want to note that the shirt here today is a Tennessee Volunteer shirt, one of my favorite old shirts here. Football season is starting next week as I record this. As I put this out, it'll probably be halfway over, but trying to build up a series of episodes before I start putting them out, because this is going to be a limited run. I said this in the first one. I'm going to say it again. It's going to be a limited run. I'm going to then see what happens, see if I want to do this again, see if I pass the exam like here I've got on my whiteboard, because this is an episode about testing. So get out there and build software. Make it as robust as possible. Watch what happens. Make sure you have logs and anything you can to check usage and any kind of outlandish values. Log things that aren't all alphanumeric. Why aren't they alphanumeric? See if you see patterns. Look at your data. I mean, we know that, for example, an email address, people aren't always going to put in valid email addresses, but make sure they put in a reasonably valid email address. It's got the username at domain, and the domain is a real domain or that you can check. Do some of that checking. Send them a message. People are going to start putting in bad email addresses. I mean, like, people try everything. A lot of people don't want to give their email address. That's a reason why using an email address is not the greatest indicator. Apple has a thing where it will send a phony email address, so only Apple knows the connection between the two. I don't know if that's good or bad. I really trust Apple more than I trust a lot of companies, but sometimes that feels like a little too much trust if I'm doing things like that. Okay, I'm gonna end it here now. One last thing. I'm the worst, absolute worst at ending a presentation or a podcast because I feel like I want to keep talking. So what I'm going to say is, thank you very much for listening, watching. Please like, subscribe, all that, right? Anything you can do to help me spread the word. That's all for tonight. I thank you so much for being here and listening, and I'll see you next time.